Well, we can return to Westminster now and speak to Tadhg Enright for more reaction to those exit polls. Tadhg, have you had a chance to speak to perhaps any MPs who are looking to find their way back to the House of Parliament?
There are precious few of them, Tokes, hanging around in the cold and wet. They're in the far more comfortable surroundings of the indoor plush election studios of many of the domestic broadcasters here. But I have spoken to many Conservative insiders who are sharing really in the shock of this exit poll, which, if it turns out to be a real reflection of reality, would mean that Boris Johnson will be leading the next government of the UK with a very, very handsome majority altogether. Let me bring in one of those advisors who's standing beside me. Stephen Lynch was in the press team of the Conservative Party, or indeed of number 10, between 2015 and 2017, straddling obviously the time of the referendum. Your thoughts on the prediction made by the pollsters tonight?
I think this is an extraordinary exit poll, Tadhg. I think the results, if they're anywhere near a clear reflection of this, will be far beyond what people in CCHQ and number 10 were expecting. I had gone into this with a degree of caution. I was actually feeling quite nervous about this. I think a majority of perhaps 20 to 30 seats would have been a reasonable return on this. But getting a majority as big as the days of Margaret Thatcher, Labour losing 71 seats, this is really remaking British politics, this election.
Do you think we're gearing up, not for a fundamental redrawing, but a very significant redrawing of the politics of the last few years? I mean, you bring into the conversation Labour's performance in this election. This exit poll suggests they're on just 191 seats, which, if it does turn out to be close to reality, will be a very disappointing result for Jeremy Corbyn and the kind of the project of taking that party far to the left. Could a resurgent Labour Party led by a moderate leader create problems for for Prime Minister Johnson?
Well, looking at the arithmetic alone, it's going to be a real challenge, but I think it's going to come down to a question of tactics and strategy. So in terms of what the other Remain parties decide to do, if this proves to be an accurate result, do they accept the premise now that Brexit is now settled? Do they accept that the UK is going to leave by the end of January next year? The withdrawal agreement will be passed, and will they then focus their efforts on trying to sway Mr Johnson's government towards a softer, or say a more closer alignment with the EU27?
But you mentioned there leaving the EU by the end of January, and certainly if the withdrawal agreement is ratified, that will be the legal truth, but not really the practical truth, because the transition period is scheduled to last until the end of next year, much shorter than it was supposed to be if Britain had left the EU at the time it was supposed to. And is Boris Johnson really gearing up to disappoint many of his supporters by perhaps not being able to agree a trade deal, a future trade deal within that tight time frame?
Well, the EU have a reputation for being fearsome negotiators, and the clock, if you like, is very much against the UK government. But Boris will have a stronger hand with this increased majority. I completely accept the premise that the future trade and relationship negotiations are going to be even more contentious than the divorce bill that's been settled. It's going to talk about issues involving the city, agriculture, fisheries, all these issues. But I think given that they're starting from a position of alignment, and if you look at countries like the US and Australia, they have concluded trade agreements within sort of 2 years. So it is possible.
But would, if the withdrawal agreement and the trade deal, if it is based loosely upon the withdrawal agreement, and all that means for the relationship between Britain and Northern Ireland and the checking of goods between those two parts of the UK, and the disenchantment that there is north of the border in Scotland, is this Brexit deal, or might Boris Johnson think, or might indeed Conservative grassroots accept that this Brexit deal is worth sacrificing potentially parts of the UK, be it Scotland, be it Northern Ireland?
Well, I think the proof is going to be in the result that we see here today. These are points that have been raised by the opposition during the election campaign. There seems to have been a bit of confusion, to put it charitably, about the Northern Ireland checks issue. But
the internal government documents suggested that there will indeed be checks. Boris Johnson throughout the campaign insisted that there won't be. Many of his critics were saying he's basically being economical with the truth, to put a very polite spin on it. Based on the many promises that he made throughout this campaign, not just on Brexit but in areas such as public spending, with people questioning, well, where is all this money suddenly going to come from? I mean, even if Britain is on course for 5 years of Conservative government, could you put money on Boris Johnson still being in charge of that Conservative government at the end of the 5-year term?
I think he's, again, with the caveat about this exit poll is not a real result, I think he has potential to be in office for, I don't even want to put a figure on it because it sounds very presumptuous to do. There is potential there for him to lead the party and the country for the foreseeable future.
Even though many Conservative members might have voted, and supporters voted for him as Prime Minister and for his continuation of this government through gritted teeth, because many within our own party don't like him.
Well, I think what you find often in elections is it's a binary choice at times in terms of who can be Prime Minister. And I think quite a lot of people, perhaps Labour Leave supporters in northern constituencies, perhaps made a late decision to reluctantly but firmly to support Boris Johnson and the Conservatives rather than voting for Jeremy Corbyn. And that's borne out by the exit poll.
Okay, Stephen Lynch, thank you very much for joining us on Euronews tonight. Stephen Lynch is a former communications officer within the Conservative Party within number 10 Downing Street. He is right, we are still just talking about an exit poll. It's not definitive, but it has been very reliable as an indicator of the final result in the past. But we wait for those results to come through in the hours ahead of us. Back to you now in Lyon.